So, with every new The Last of Us Part 2 trailer that's released in the years since its announcement, there's been a new big question and theory on everyone's mind every time. Is Joel dead? Is the mystery woman Ellie's mother? And is Dina actually dead? So, one would think that that trend would continue with the new release date trailer and the Outbreak Day footage, but of course, that wasn't the case. Hey stragglers and tourists, my name is the iPad Cat, and in today's video, we're going to go over the question that's been on, and still is, on everybody's mind since the E3 demo up until this day. Is Dina actually dead, and/or did we see her die in the release date trailer? What makes people think that, and what do I think about it? So why don't we just get on with it? Like with my last video about the origins of the new infected classes in part 2, which you can watch here if you're interested, this video is sort of a continuation of one I did ages and ages ago about the possibility of Dina dying in part 2. It was short and almost entirely based on the Bracelet theory, but now new information has come out and the question still remains, hence this video. So what is it this time that's making people go, oh yeah, Dina is definitely going to die? Well, of course Ellie is still wearing her bracelet in many of the shots of the trailer, as well as the second level of the demo that the journalists got to play at the behind closed doors event. And Dina can only be seen in scenes that we know take place before whatever violent event disrupts Ellie's peaceful life in Jackson. However, that's not really what everybody's talking about now, is it? No. It's this scene from the release date trailer.
Get off me! Please stop! No!
So many people jump to the conclusion that this is where Dina is shot and killed in front of Ellie, which in turn marks the start of her journey of revenge and hatred that'll be the focus of part 2, immediately after seeing it. Which on the surface level makes a lot of sense. But is that really what happened? Now, I know a lot of people will just straight up answer yes to that question and be done with it, and that's completely fine. I respect that standpoint, though I'd like to go through a couple of things that point toward it not being the case. The first being how it makes no sense to reveal a major character death before the game is even released. The Last of Us Part 2's biggest selling point, like other Naughty Dog games and most other Sony exclusives, is the story. Sure, many people like me and other The Last of Us fans love the gameplay and the multiplayer of these games, but there's a sizable amount of others who consider them nothing more than glorified movies or just like it for the story. Thus, ruining the integrity of pretty much the only important thing to the vast majority of players would be a dumb move. I mean, it's like telling a moviegoer about to buy tickets to watch The Empire Strikes Back in 1980 that, oh, before you watch it, just know that Vader is actually Luke's father. Don't you think that'd ruin it just a little bit? Anyways, I know this argument was a bit more opinion-based rather than factual, so I thought I'd get it out of the way first. Moving on, the fact that Naughty Dog are masters of deception and misleading should be front and center when it comes to discussions like this one. They'll rearrange shots in trailers to give you a totally different impression than what actually happens. Add parts and footage to demos and trailers that don't even exist in the final game, and shift focus in their marketing to create misconceptions of how major or minor something or someone is in the story, etc. And this isn't just me talking and making things up. There is proof and confessions from Naughty Dog themselves that prove all of these. I've mentioned it before, but in one of the trailers for part 1, for example, it looks as if Ellie is actually pointing the gun she used to save Joel from the hunter who tried to drown him in the Pittsburgh Grand Hotel at him. Even though the two shots are from completely different parts of the game and the exact opposite happened, that's what the trailer made it look like, and it was intentional. If we look at The Last of Us Part 1's E3 2012 demo, it may appear very similar to what we got, but the start of it never happens in the actual game.
Go! Go! Go!
This way! Did we lose him?
Yeah,
But we're not in the clear, right?
not while we're in this city.
And finally, if we look at both the marketing for Part 1 and 2, there is a lot of focus on things that, in the case of Part 1, didn't end up having all as much importance in the actual game, and Part 2 may not end up having as much importance as it seems once it launches. In the trailers, demos, and even cutscenes that were released before the launch of Part 1, the hunters were very prominently featured. Someone who has only watched the marketing material and not played the game will more than likely get the impression that the hunters are one of, if not the major and perhaps only antagonist of Part 1. But in the actual game, they don't even have a major character as part of their faction. Almost all of them are just nameless nobodies that are just thrown at us for the entirety of the Pittsburgh chapter, while the Fireflies, on the other hand, ended up being way more important to the story in the final game than the Hunters. There was no way of telling that through the marketing. Furthermore, have you noticed that up until the release day trailer and the Outbreak Day demo, everyone was talking about the Seraphites being the main or even only enemy faction? How they're surely the cause for whatever violent act that disrupts Ellie's life in Jackson is. And how now, with them only being shown in small snippets, contrary to the new faction, the WLF, nobody talks about them. And instead, it's all about how the Wolves are the real or the main villains. This is intentional. Now, that is a lot that's not directly about Dina, but I hope you're seeing where I'm going with it. Just because something seems obvious in a Naughty Dog trailer does not mean it's what happens in the final game. In fact, it's usually not at all what it seems. Also, do I have to point out how awfully convenient it is that we don't actually see whatever happened in that basement? The fact that Dina's death appears to be so obvious should be an immediate red flag to anyone with any experience with how Naughty Dog markets their games. Moving on, let's talk a bit about what hints the story details and themes of the game we've learned from the interviews and demos can give us on the topic of Dina's potential death. Starting with what launched this whole theory almost 16 months ago at this point, the Bracelet. Now, since we knew that Part 2 would be about hatred and revenge even a year ago, it wasn't that weird that we all assumed that the death of Ellie's new love interest would be the reason for it. Considering we see a scene taking place way back in time followed by one taking place much later where Ellie can be seen wearing the very same bracelet that her love interest did in the previous scene, obviously we went to the conclusion that it has to be a keepsake. Something to remember her lost love by, and to keep her going in the hardest of times when she's starting to doubt why she's doing it. Except, it's not. Well, it could, of course, serve any of those purposes anyways, but she doesn't have it because Dina died. In fact, it was a gift from Dina to Ellie. When, where, and why she gave it away is still unknown, but we do know that she did from the official Ellie cosplay guide released by Naughty Dog on Outbreak Day. So no, the bracelet is not proof of Dina's death. But what about the themes of the game then? The cycle of violence, hatred, how far you would go to avenge your loved ones. How does that even work if Dina doesn't die? Well, who says somebody has to die for you to want revenge? A violent event doesn't have to mean a murder, even if that may seem obvious in the world of The Last of Us. Nobody, well, except for Callus, rest in peace, died in the winter chapter of the first game, but it was still the darkest and most horrible in the entire game. Enough so for Ellie to violently take revenge on David at the end of it, and despite how sad Callus' death may have been, I think we all know that that wasn't the reason for it. Things can still be massively horrible and screwed up without people dying. On top of this, Neil Druckmann, the man himself, is reported to have told the people who attended the behind the closed doors event that part 2 will be a unique revenge story that could only be told through a video game. Now, I don't know about you, but someone going on a violent journey of revenge after the death of a loved one hardly sounds unique, nor like something that could only be told through a video game. Now, what this unique thing could be, or what makes it only possible in a video game is, I have no clue. Anyways, what does the actual story details we know of so far hint at? Well, of course, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but something very bad happens sometime early on in the game. But that topic could be a whole video in itself. The more interesting details, however, at least that are relevant to the discussion of whether or not Dina is dead, are about their relationship. So, for the past 4 years, by the time of the party we see in the E3 demo, Ellie and Dina have been very close friends. But there's always been this underlying romance between the two. And when Dina boldly drags Ellie out to the dance floor, that romance goes right up to the surface as they kiss. The day after this party, the two go out on patrol, fight some infected, and get caught off guard by a blizzard and end up taking shelter from it in an old weed bunker that used to belong to a friend of Tommy. Sometime during or after these events, Dina gives Ellie her Hamza bracelet as a gift. Also, at an unknown time later in the story, and presumably more of a dragged out thing than a single event, Ellie's tattoo, given to her by her ex-girlfriend Kat, becomes a subject of tension between the two. And that's basically what we know. We don't know if the scene at the cabin where Ellie is ambushed and held down actually takes place on the same day as her patrol with Dina, as it wasn't a part of the demo. And honestly, at this point, I'm not sure. However, let's just assume that it does, for the discussion's sake. Because if it does, it's virtually impossible that Dina dies there. Remember, this day is the very first day of their romantic relationship. The fact that Ellie's tattoo will cause tension between the two, and that Dina at some point will give her bracelet to her later in the story, basically confirms that Dina survives past that day. Unless all of that happens in a single chapter whilst they're smoking weed in that bunker, and then is abruptly over. But that would be very weird. But that's not all. Neil Druckmann has also said that Dina and Ellie's relationship is incredibly important to the core of The Last of Us Part 2, which would be an outright lie, a false promise, and just plain contradictory if Dina dies on the first day of their relationship, or early on in the story in general for that matter, which of course is possible considering Naughty Dog's track record. So what do I actually think then? Well, if it's not obvious yet, I don't believe Dina will die. At least not in that scene from the release date trailer, and not in the very beginning of the game. Later on though, maybe, anything is possible. But what I'm quite certain of is that Dina's death is not the violent event that causes this crusade of revenge Ellie is going on. A million things could fit the description of violent event / disruption. I could even see some of them involving Dina too, just not her death. One alternative I've been thinking about a lot lately is that Dina or Ellie, or both, or some other character, may actually get tortured or raped / sexually abused in combination with some sort of attack on Jackson. And considering Ellie's previous experience with such horrors, I'm sure it'd be something to make her incredibly mad. Sure, it may seem like a minor thing to travel hundreds of miles to other states and to take on entire factions for, but remember the cycle of violence. One act leads to another, and so on. Anyways, what happens in that actual violent disruption will have to be the topic for another video. I'd rather make something in-depth about it than ramble here. So, in conclusion, for all of the reasons stated in this video, I do not believe that we saw Dina die in the release date trailer. But that is just my view on it. What do you think? Do you agree with my points? Disagree? Do you think that Dina will die in part 2? Tell me in the comments down below and let's talk about it. And why not join the discussion on my Discord server once you're done with that? And until next time, have a great day.